In this video, I'll show how to install Debian 12 to an HP Proliant server. Okay, so I've already downloaded an ISO image for Debian 12. I placed that on a flash drive, and that's inserted into the server. I booted the server, then pressed F5 and then F8 to get into the Smart Array configuration section here. What I want to do is I want to create a RAID 1 mirror. This system has 2 drives, so I'm going to create a RAID 1 mirror now. And first thing I'm going to do is check and make sure there are no logical drives created, so that's good. So we'll go to Create Logical Drive, and then I want to select each of these drives, make sure that both of these 1 terabyte drives are selected, and then I'm going to tab over to the RAID configurations, and I'm going to select RAID 1. That is what we want, so we can have a RAID 1 mirror and have our data copied to both drives at all times. And that should be good. So we're going to press enter to create the logical drive. And we have verification here. You've selected a logical drive with the total size of 1 terabyte and RAID 1 fault tolerance. Press F8 to save the configuration. So let's do that. Good. We'll press enter to continue. And now if we view the logical drive, we'll see we do indeed have that RAID 1 terabyte drive. So a lot of times when I'm working on servers, I'll put in 2 drives, install the operating system as RAID 1 on those 2 drives, and then add some more drives later, maybe 2 more drives, 4 more drives, 6 more drives, and set those up as RAID 5 or RAID 6. Or sometimes I'll do a RAID 10 ZFS type setup. It depends on the system. In this case, we'll set up Debian on this RAID 1 mirror. So let's escape out of this screen. And we'll escape out of this menu for the smart drive array, and we're going to want to boot the system to the flash drive. And we're going to press F11 to select our boot here. And I want one-time boot off of my USB, so I'm going to press number 3 and see if it boots up properly. There we go. And I'm going to do this as a menu-based install. Instead of the graphical install, I'll just choose install so we don't need a GUI or a mouse. Now, you may also sometimes do it as a complete text-based install in the console. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it with the menus. And you might have noticed that the server has stopped making a bunch of fan noise because we're out of the BIOS and the firmware, and now we're into the actual installation of the OS. So let's get started. We'll press enter for install, and that brings us to our select a language screen. For all of the periods of time where it takes a minute or two to get to the next screen, I'm just going to be fast forwarding through, but I'll let you know when I do that. So I'll press enter for English because that's what I want, and United States for my location, and American English for my key map here. Again, doing this all with keyboard and no mouse. And we'll just fast forward through loading additional components. This is detecting network interface devices. There's 4 on this server, so it's going to detect those automatically as EN01 through 4. And then it tells us, hey, you have to select what your primary network interface will be, so you can select any one of those, but normally you're going to want to pick the first one. And so that's what I'm going to do. And so that's going to grab an IP address from a DHCP on my network. If you don't have a DHCP server, then it would tell you and you'd have to manually assign an IP address, which you may want to do with your server, and that's fine. I show how to do that on other videos, but we'll just leave it as DHCP for now until we're done with the installation. Okay, next is host name, and I'm going to call this server Delta Ray. Okay, another server on my network, call it Delta Ray, press continue, not using a fully qualified domain name just yet. So I'm going to leave the domain name portion out of this and just press enter to continue. So this is all tab based, this menu system. We can tab through the different fields here, go back out to the password, down to show password, continue, go back, and back to the password. So it's a tab-based, tab delimited system. I just like to reduce the amount of resources I'm using as much as possible, and not having a graphic user interface is one way to do that. So I'm going to type in my root password that I'm going to use and press enter and retype it to verify. Good. And now we need a user account as well. So the root user is important. It has full control over everything. When you install Debian, the root user has to be given a password by default. Then you create another user, and later you could turn that user into a sudoer or administrator if you wanted to. So I'm going to make that user now, and we'll just call this user sysadmin. And that's going to be the username as well. We'll put a password in here. Make sure you're choosing lengthy and complex passwords whenever you work with these systems. Okay, next, configure the clock. We're going to go with the Eastern time zone. That's where I'm at, so press enter for that. Now that's going to detect our disk and start up the partitioner. In this system, we have a single volume. We have that RAID 1 array. It's 2 drives, but it's considered one volume. And so that's what Debian sees. The firmware is creating that RAID 1 in the server itself, but Debian just sees the one volume. So I'm going to make this simple. I'm just going to do a guided setup. We'll do guided use entire disk, and we'll press enter for that. Select the partition. Well, it only shows 2. We've got that SanDisk Ultra. That's my USB drive that has the Debian ISO image. And then we have our 1 terabyte HP logical volume, which was created in the firmware. So that's what I want to use. That's what I want to install to. So we'll press enter for that. And then we have some choices. We can have all files in one partition, or we could separate our home partition or separate the home, var, and temp partitions. Generally, I'll separate the home partitions on Linux installs so that all the users are separated. And if I need to recover that data, that will work well. Now, in this particular install, I'm not too concerned about users. I'm just going to do all files in one partition. This is more of a test server for me, so I'm not really too concerned with users and separate partitions and so on. And so here's the overview. It shows everything we have here. We have our 1 terabyte logical volume that we're going to be using, and that's where we're going to install Debian. So we'll press enter for finish partitioning and write changes to disk. And then we have to specifically say yes. So we arrow over to yes and write those changes to disks. Got to do that double verification there. We're doing this as ext4 by default as our file system. That's fine. That's what I want to use here. But you never know. You might use other file systems. You might use ZFS if you have a more in-depth fault-tolerant system. And that's what I do for my Proxmox servers and some other servers. So that's up to you. But the default is ext4. And we'll just fast forward through this installing the base system. Okay, that's done. Now we need to configure the package manager and our Debian archive location. I'm in the United States, so we want that. So I'm going to press enter. But you would want to choose your country and your Debian archive that you wish to use. Usually I work with deb.debian.org, so I'm going to select that and press enter. I'm not using any type of proxy, so we'll just press enter for that. If you were, you'd have to type that in here. That'll configure APT, the advanced package tool, and we'll fast forward through that. And now it's selecting and installing software. That's the phase we're at. So it's installing a lot of things for us, like our Linux image, and we're going to have to get to our task selector in just a moment. We'll fast forward to that. And so that took about a minute. It could take longer or shorter depending on your system. Just make sure that the progress bar is moving and you see files copying as you progress through the installation. So at this point, it's asking for the popularity contest, and this is where your system sends information to Debian. I'm not participating in this, so I'm going to press no, press enter for no here. You can always add that back later, and that's going to bring up the task cell. That's the software selection for our system. Okay, so we see here we have a lot of desktop environments that you could possibly select. Now, if you were working on a PC or a laptop, you would probably have the Debian desktop environment and GNOME checkmarked automatically because it would know, it would say, okay, you have this type of system and this type of video card. We're going to install a desktop for you. If that happens and you want to install a proper server, then you would want to deselect those. But Debian actually sees that this is a proper server. It's an HP Proliant server. So it did not select any of these desktops. But if they were selected and you wanted to have an actual server, then you'd want to get rid of these. Now, regardless of how you install Debian, with a desktop or without, it can act as a server. But to be the best server and to run with the least amount of resources and have the smallest footprint, you want to deselect all of those desktops and just operate the server in the console and command line only. So you want to make sure all of those are deselected. I do actually want the SSH server and the standard system utilities, so I'm going to leave those asterisked, and we'll tab over to continue and press enter to install our software. And we'll fast forward through that installation of the software now. Now it's asking to install the grub bootloader as the primary boot record. And so that's really what we want normally. You might use others, but I do want to use the grub bootloader. So I'm going to say yes for this and press enter. And it's going to ask what drive do you want to install this to, and that's going to be our /dev/SDA. That's our RAID 1 mirror. I definitely don't want the SanDisk Ultra. That's my USB flash drive. So we're going to use this one here, /dev/SDA. That's our main drive, and press enter. And fast forward through the finishing up of the installation. Okay, so the installation is complete, and so it asked me to remove the boot media, and that was this flash drive, so I have taken this out of the server, and we can go ahead and press continue to reboot the system. That'll finish up the installation, clean it up, and reboot the server. There you go, and the fans get loud as it goes through the boot phase. It tests the fans and kind of clears everything out. And so this is going to take a minute or two to go through the boot up phase. So we're going to fast forward through this now. Okay, it's rebooted. The font size is very small right now, but you can see that we just have console only, and it's requesting a login. And the first thing I'm going to do is make that font size bigger. So I'm going to log in as root right now and type my password. And we are in as root at Delta Ray. So as I say here, it's a really small font size. There's a couple ways to change this. You could change the resolution, or you could change the font size itself. Let's see what we have here. I'm going to run a dpackage-reconfigure. And we're going to do a console setup. And so that brings up the configuring console setup. And this is pretty much the easiest way on a Debian server to increase the font size. Again, other ways to do it, but we're going to do it this way. So we're going to leave this as UTF-8 and press enter and leave it as Latin. And then I'm going to select the type of font I want. Generally, I'll go down to Terminus Bold, press enter for that. And then we'll select something a bit bigger, like 11 by 22. Press enter, and you can see at the bottom there, it's definitely a bigger size. If that's not big enough, we could go even bigger, and maybe I'll do that. And here's that command again, just in case you couldn't see it. That's dpkg-reconfigure, console-setup. And let's try it one more time. This particular video connection could be a little bit better, but that is definitely much bigger, and that should work. Okay, so for example, if we run the top program, You should be able to see all that on the screen much better now. Okay, good. Press Q to quit out of that. So a couple things I want to do here. Mainly, I want to update the system, but I also want to do a couple of configurations for the user and for networking. So let's do those now. And so first thing, let's check what we have running here. So this is Debian server. Now, if we were to do something like a cat on /etc/ something like this, we would see, yes, it is Debian 12, and that's Bookworm, but what is the point release? We have to go a little deeper for that. If we do a cat /etc/Debian_version, we'll see, yes, that is 12.5. So we should be up to date, but we're going to want to check that. So we'll do an apt update and see what we get here. And this proves to me right now that not only do we have a network connectivity out to the internet, but it is all up to date. If it was not, we would want to do an apt upgrade -y and get all the latest updates, especially those security updates. But we are indeed at 12.5, which is good because Debian automatically updated the system during the install. The flash drive that I was using actually has 12.4 on it. So Debian actually did the update for us, and that is awesome. But if it didn't, generally what you would do is you would run an apt update $apt upgrade -y the first time once you first get the server running. Next thing is we have that other user account, that sysadmin. But sysadmin is not an administrator yet. I want to make sysadmin an administrator so I don't necessarily have to use the root account all the time for administrative functions. So let's do that now. First, let's look at the sysadmin account. We'll do an ID on sysadmin and press enter. And we can see here that it is not a member of sudo. And so that's what I want to do. So we'll do a user mod -a capital G. Group is sudo. And the user that I want to add to sudo is sysadmin. Good. Now we'll run that ID command on sysadmin. And now we can see, if you compare the two, after the floppy group, you can see that sudo is now added. So the sysadmin account is now a sudoer, an administrator on this system. Very good. And finally, let's check networking. If we run an IPA command, we'll see we have our 4 network interface cards. One of them is configured with IP, and that's getting an IP address from a DHCP server. And you can see number 2, it's called ENO1, has the IP address 10.42.210.12. And further over, it says dynamic. So it's getting that IP address from a DHCP server. If you don't want this and you want to set it statically, we can do that. And we can do that within the interfaces configuration file. So let's show how to do that here. And generally, I use Vim. I don't know if that's installed, and it is not. So I'm going to grab that real quick with an apt install vim-y. Definitely got to have Vim. That's what I like to use. Nano's the built-in text editor in Debian, but I like to use Vim. So I'm going to use that now, and we'll do a vim/etc/network/interfaces. That is the configuration file for networking in Debian. Press enter for that, and we can see here that at the end it says DHCP. And so if you don't want it to obtain an IP address from a DHCP server, you can set it statically by typing static. You need a space in there, though. Press enter, tab over, and we'll type in the address that we want. And for me, that's going to be 10.42.0.21/24. Press enter, tab over again, and type in the gateway. The gateway IP for me is 10.42.0.1. And that's it. That should be good. Control C to get out of insert mode, :WQ to save and quit. So for that configuration to take effect, we either reboot the system or we can reactivate the network interface card. I like to avoid reboots if at all possible. they're time consuming and so on. So let's do an if down on EN01 and then an if up on EN01. Good. And now let's do an IPA once again. And we can see that the IP address for EN01 has changed to 10.42.0.21. And you can see that that dynamic is not there anymore. So very good. Now you always want to test and make sure it does actually work. So I'm going to ping my gateway address, which is 10.42.0.1. Press enter. We're getting replies. Good. And let's ping something on the internet like example.com. And that works as well. Good. So now we have the IP fixed also. So effectively what I did was I installed Debian into a Proliant server and did that into a RAID 1 mirror. And once we got it installed as a proper server with no desktop environments, we made sure that it was all updated. And we created a separate user account that also has administrative privileges now. We did that with the usermod command. So that's our sysadmin account. And we modified the IP address to a static IP. Now, if you wanted to make modifications to the other network cards, you could also do that. And again, it's all done in one place in that interfaces file. And so we would just add additional network interfaces here. You could have your secondary network interface, which would be EN02, a tertiary network interface, which would be EN03, and that's what I'm going to do later on as I configure this server. So that's about it. That's the entire installation of Debian 12 into a proper Proliant server, working as a server with command line only. Hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to subscribe to my website or channel, and that's it. We'll see you next time.